Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm going to be talking about Episode 9 of Season 1 of The Legend of Korra called Out of the Past. Once again, there's a whole lot going on, loads to talk about, so let's dive right into it. And since it's her show, let's start with Korra. Honestly, Korra is in a lot of ways sitting on the sidelines in this episode. She's literally spends most of the episode locked in a box. But in a way, this is kind of what Korra needed. We've seen that she needs that the standard methods that we've seen don't seem to work for Korra. It really took her giving pro bending a try before she could even find her feet even a little bit as an airbender. And here she basically ends up in what is not exactly, but in along the lines of a sensory deprivation tank. And this is what finally forces her to stop, take a breath, and take a crack at that spiritual side of things that she has so long struggled with and, frankly, until this point, flat out neglected. And amazingly enough, it doesn't really take that much. Now, remember, as the Avatar, Korra is by nature sort of meant to be in tune with her past lives, with the spirit world, and all this other stuff. So I really can't help but wonder if maybe it was there was just some sort of mental block with Korra going on before. And do keep in mind that down in the South Pole, she was kind of used to having her own way. Here, Korra is literally forced to to do this, to have no other option but to try and tap into this aspect of herself in order to save herself from a really, really grim situation. Um, well, since we're going down that line, and this is the big meat of the episode, let's talk about what we have learned about the past. Um, it really is, of course, very interesting to see how the characters' voices changed as they became adults. I have no problem with the voices. I was just a little bit surprised at how deep Aang's voice ended up becoming, but we're seeing him in the entire show. Previously, he was 12 years old, and from the looks of him, it didn't look like puberty had quite kicked in on Aang. But it certainly has by the time we see him now. Well, for one thing, Aang is surprisingly tall. He really must have had a growth spurt in his teen years. Um, I'll say this now: I'm not exactly digging the whole Abraham Lincoln beard thing that he has going on, but what's done is done. But anyway, we get a good look at the future version, actually the past now versions of Aang, Toph, and Sokka. Aang is, of course, the Avatar. He's very confident in himself. He is pretty much this as we have seen him before. It's just it seems that fun-loving side of him isn't doesn't mean it's gone. It's just simply not on display here. And of course, given the very serious circumstances of what's going on, that makes complete and utter sense. But we do see that Aang has apparently become quite comfortable with the Avatar state. He only needs just a little nudge from it in order to break free of the bloodbending, and then using his own abilities, not the power of the Avatar state, he is able to use that to put an end to what Yakon is doing. And we do see that he has indeed that the whole energy bending, soul bending, spirit bending, whatever particular fan term you want to use for it, that what he did with Ozai was not a one-shot thing. Not that I expected that to be, but it was definitely good to have it confirmed that was what was going on there. And it is what we do see is that it is, as the fan speculation has gone, that Yakon indeed was a bloodbender, and apparently a really powerful one. And what we get in the courtroom drama is that bloodbending is an incredibly rare art. That is, I believe, the exact words they term. And I'm sure some people are going to be upset by this. They had sort of assumed that Hama had invented bloodbending and that nobody else in the entire history, in the thousands and thousands of years of the Avatar world, had ever stumbled upon that particular secret but her. Yeah, I think you could probably sort of guess from the sarcasm in my voice what I think of that particular school of thought. Well, it's pretty much shot all to heck right here. And I do like that they did use Sokka to point out he uses both Toph and Combustion Man as examples of how there are people out there in the Avatar world who, for whatever reason, have found ways around the normal rules of bending. Now, whether or not this is going to be elaborated on, or if this is just, them sort of doing a little hand wave, it's a little unclear right now. But I did find it very intriguing that the new rule for bloodbending, at least as Yakone and Tarlok practice it, is that they can use this power at any time except during the full moon. Now, keep in mind, when we saw her back in the original series, Hama explicitly says that let me slow down, that bloodbending can only be done under a full moon. So if that's the case with Tarlok and Yakone, well, who's to say that there's not another exception as it is regarding energy bending, and that's the term I'm going to use for it, just for sake of simplicity, that Amon is not that person who is an exception. Of course, if that's the case, then that would seem to imply that Amon is in fact some sort of a bender himself. And, I don't really want to go too far down this road because, speculation is ultimately usually pointless. I admit I have indulged in it from time to time, but it's not something I like to do too awful much because 99% of the time, whatever you think is going to happen is going to turn out to be wrong in one way or another. And if you start throwing around your speculation on the internet, well, it's there forever. And I'm just one of those people who just doesn't like the idea of me having publicly said I think this is the case and then having it turn out to be wrong, out there on record for all time. Yeah, I'm funny that way. But anyway, let's move back to talking about the future of our original series characters. Toph, of course, not the only one that shows that Aang is not the only one who's undergone a major growth spurt, but we'd already seen that. Here we get to hear her voice. Again, perfectly fitting for what Toph would sound like as an adult, and I was very pleased that after all these years, let's see here, 28 years, if I'm doing my math correctly, as she's still referring to Aang as Twinkle Toes. And it is more than a little amusing that after all that time, it still irritates him. But, that's just the way things are among friends. Now, the person here who really, really caught my interest with this episode, because he was my favorite character on the original show, was of course Sokka. And here we see that he ended up becoming a member of the city council here in Republic City. And honestly, this is something that I do think is very, very fitting for Sokka. Remember, when we first see Sokka, he's 15 years old, and he is basically the leader of his tribe. Now, granted, his father is, of course, the official chief, but all of the men have gone off to fight the Fire Nation and left Sokka in charge of looking after the village. I mean, this is a kid who in our world would not even be old enough to drive, and he's in charge of, and is basically the entire army for protecting his sister, his grandmother, all the women and children of that one village that he comes from. So Sokka's a guy who, from a very, very young age, has been going down that path of leadership. And honestly, in a lot of ways, you can really say that he was the leader of the kids in the original show. He was the guy who was very good at keeping everybody focused on the goal of stopping Fire Lord Ozai. Yeah, jeez. Because of Sozin's comment, I keep wanting to call him Fire Lord Sozin, even though I know that's not right. But anyway, and it really was. I have to admit, I did get a very big kick out of Sokka talking about his boomerang all those years later. It sounds like he definitely retained his fondness for boomerang over all those years. So then we come to the big meat of the episode where Yakone uses his bloodbending on Aang and Toph and Sokka and all those other people there. Now there were some people who, when they sort of saw the flashbacks earlier in the episodes about this event, were freaking out because it's like, oh my god, Yakone used the bloodbending to murder Sokka and Toph. And while it's pretty hard to deny that Korra is darker than the original series, I just honestly never expected, and I'm glad I was at least proven right here, that the series was never going to go that dark. We have seen people die in the Avatar shows. We have seen violence. We have seen, very strongly implied, if never outright stated, evidence of genocide. But I just can't really think that they're going to allow us to see characters, especially characters that we have become very fond of, just flat out brutally murdered on the show. I mean, you can talk about the anime influence on Avatar. You can talk about how it is a reasonably mature show, but at the end of the day, this is still an American show, and we're just not going to see a whole lot of characters being violently murdered on a show on Nickelodeon. I mean, at the end of the day, Korra is essentially designed to be a kid show, and that just ain't happening on American TV. But anyway, now that we've finished talking about the flashback, let's hop back to the present of the Korra world and the aftermath of the big fight at City Hall. Well, okay, first of all, let's give Tarlok some credit for coming up with a pretty well staged lie. Of course, I mean, he's able to fool someone like Lin Beifong, who's no fool. But of course, there are some very obvious and immediate problems with his story. The main one being, he had a big, powerful fight with Korra in City Hall in Republic City. Okay, now think about the noise and from the firebending. This must have generated a huge amount of noise and light and all this other stuff. And apparently, the Republic City Halls has the thickest walls that I have ever heard of, because no one else in the city noticed a humongous bender battle happening in City Hall, even though a huge portion of the building was wrecked in the fight. No one heard anything. No one saw anything. And speaking of which, if Tarlok was, it's like, let me try this. Tarlok's story is that he was knocked out in the fight. Well, okay. And then he says, I woke up, the police had already arrived. Well, okay, who called the police? I mean, yeah, I guess you could just say that, some office worker or whatever showed up early, and so like, oh, holy crap, I need to call the cops. But keep in mind, Republic City, the place for this battle is Republic City Hall, in a city where more than one terrorist attacks have recently happened. Now, you would think that this would put people a little on edge. People would be a little bit more alert to unusual happenings and be more inclined to call the authorities if they noticed anything funny. But again, no one noticed a humongous bender battle erupting in City Hall. Now, granted, it happened pretty late at night, but again, this is a town that's equivalent to New York City. You really think that if you were to go down by New York City Hall at 2 o'clock in the morning, there wouldn't be somebody around in the area? I'm not talking just people that work here or security guards. I just mean people who, for whatever reason, are passing by. Look, folks, I've never been to New York City, but I'm going to guess that, yeah, there would probably be some people in the area. And if two people with superpowers started duking it out in the middle of City Hall in New York City at 2 o'clock in the morning, somebody outside there would notice. But, I know I'm being a little too picky here, but again, as I have said before, as a reviewer, I think I would be doing you, my viewer, a disservice if I did not point these things out. So let's move on and talk about the rest of the characters. Let's talk briefly about Lin. We see her, she's still injured, but she's not going to let that stop her. She's out there doing her action movie rogue cop thing. We even get to see the little moment where she's like, "Oh yeah, I resigned. I'm out there to go. I'm going to go out there and do rogue cop stuff, so of course I can't wear my badge. I don't know. I thought that was a little bit of heavy-handed storytelling there, but sometimes it needed to be done. We needed to be reminded of Lynn's decision to resign and what that cost her emotionally. So I can forgive the show for that. Not really a whole lot going on with Tenzin this week. He was there just to sort of help out in the fight, and he certainly does do a good job. He's definitely improved when it comes to fighting chi blockers. So let's talk about the other three members of Team Avatar. The most interesting stuff, of course, is still going on in the whole Mako, Asami, Korra love triangle. And we are seeing that... Sorry, somebody knocked on a door down the hall. Anyway, that Asami's doubts about Korra's relationship with Mako are growing. She has, noticed things that are just, vague little hints, things that you could just simply write off as, people who are close to each other. But here she gets from good old blabbermouth Bolin the whole story that Korra and Mako have indeed kissed, and she did learn from Iki last week that Korra liked Mako. And here we do see that Mako is extraordinarily concerned about Korra's well-being, and he's it's very quiet, but is very affectionate with her when they do rescue her. And he doesn't really... Let me try that again. It is, when Korra is in danger, it seems that he completely forgets about Asami. Now remember, back at the police station when they're reunited, he's of course very glad to see her. He rushes right to her side. So again, we are reminded that whatever's going on between Mako and Korra, the feelings that Mako holds for Asami are also real too. But here we see Asami have this confirmed that she's not the only one in Mako's heart. As much as, even though he has made the choice to be with her, there is still that part of him that has... it's really hard to put in a label on. I guess you would say it's really that Mako has not quite extinguished the torch. It really is hard to put a label on this, but that Mako has not completely moved past whatever feelings of attraction he may have had for Korra. And that is not unusual in situations where people have had love triangles and all this other stuff. But it is... You can understand how this would really hurt Asami, especially after everything that she's been through, what she had to give up in order to save Mako, Korra, and Bolin. And here she's seeing that this friendship, the relationships that she has formed with these people are not 100% pure, I guess is the word that comes to my mind. That there is not 100%... there is frankly not 100% honesty among them. And again, that's normal for people. As much as we love our friends, as much as we love our families, we don't always share everything with them. And we do end up nursing these little conflicts, grudges, and all this other stuff, even among people we care about very deeply. And I think anybody who would say that after everything that's been going on that Asami and Korra aren't friends are wrong, but even people who are close friends are not above feeling jealousy, of feeling hurt by the actions of people that they care about. And that's the place that Asami is in right now. So, Mako, as I said, he's clearly not quite put whatever feelings he's had for Korra. He's clearly not managed to put them 100% to the side. Bolin, he is once again proven to be a terrible liar, and frankly, he really could have handled that situation with Asami a lot better. But what he did, the way he handled that poorly, was of course very in keeping with Bolin's character, and does serve to very much drive the plot forward. Because in these sort of situations, misunderstandings, what you learn about things that are happening among people from other people often tend to have a lot of miscommunication, a lot of misunderstandings in them. So I certainly can't fault Bolin for that. But speaking of Bolin, there is something I do need to sort of point out that's rather reminiscent of something I discussed last week. During the escape from the Equalist's prison, Bolin uses his earthbending to pull a bunch of rocks in front of the pursuing, I guess, cable car is about the best word that I can come up with, that's full of Equalists. Now let's stop about and think about this for a moment. Because of Bolin's actions, a bunch of people are going to slam traveling in a open metal car at a reasonably high rate of speed are going to slam into a bunch of rocks. Now, folks, I want you to stop and think about this. What do you think happens at even a moderate rate of speed if a human being comes into sudden contact with a bunch of rocks? The answer is splat. So, yeah, in all likelihood, Bolin just killed a couple of guys. Yeah, what was I saying about not people not dying on a kids show earlier? Yeah. So let's see here. Yeah. Okay, now that we've gotten them out of the way, let's talk about Tarlok. I had kind of suspected the possibility that he might be Yakon's son during all this. If you do the math, I don't think it's been explicitly stated how old Tarlok is, but he's certainly old enough that he would have been a kid or around that time that the events in the flashback happened. So, honestly, I was hoping they would do something a little bit more interesting than that, but, you know, it does provide a very convenient and simple explanation as to why Tarlok knows how to do that style of bloodbending. So, I'll grant the show that it's not a flaw that they chose to take the story in that direction. It's just I would have liked for something a little different. Just a matter of taste, really. But the one thing that does bother me a little bit about the whole thing is Tarlok is a public figure in a major city. He's one of the most powerful people in the city, and he was able to complete a completely false identity for himself and use that to rise to power. Now, granted, this is analogous, set in a time that is analogous to the 1920s, when there is no internet or anything like that, and public records are just a matter of slipping some paperwork into a filing cabinet, something that's obviously well within Tarlok's capabilities. But still, you would think that someone like that would have their past investigated, or at least publicly known to a pretty good degree. I mean, really, there was no reporter out there who decided, why don't I go and talk to some folks in Tarlok's hometown, or talk to his parents, or something like this. Now, granted, who knows what kind of falsehoods Tarlok dummied up about himself, but if you're going to be a big player, a big mover and shaker, your past is going to come under a lot of scrutiny, just by your enemies, by your potential allies, by the press, whatever. And just the fact that nobody stumbled onto the fact that, he's the son of one of the most notorious criminals in the entire history of the city, that's straining credibility for me just a little bit. But again, it's something that I can forgive in the greater terms of storytelling. And I did like how, for all his planning, for all his feelings of looking down on people who are non-benders, his genuine belief that benders are the people who should be running the city, it's some normal, as far as we know, mousy, non-bending guy who is, the Watergate security guard who just completely and utterly sinks Tarlock. So there is no small amount of irony in that. It is this big, powerful, bending guy brought down not through violence, not through fighting, just a normal, non-bending person having the courage to speak up and hit him with the most dangerous weapon of all, the truth. I'm reminded of something that a British writer by the name of Warren Ellis wrote in a comic book called Transmetropolitan, which is actually an excellent series, about a journalist in a very dystopian sort of future world city. And I won't go into details, but basically and this may not be word for word, but the journalist says at one point in the early story, the truth is like a gun with one bullet in it. Aim it right, and you can blow off a kneecap. And yeah, that's what happens here. That Tarlock got kneecapped. And then he got his bending taken away by Amon. Really wasn't Tarlock's day. So there's really not a whole lot to say about Amon right here. What we have seen is he has slowly continued to work up the ladder. He starts off with some criminals. He ends up moving on to some cheating athletes. Then he moves on to the bending police. And now he has struck down one of the members of the city council. So really, who is left for him to take down but Korra? So obviously the time has come. And hey, speaking of which, why did they hold on to the metal bender cops after Amon had taken away their bending? I mean, I guess you could say they might have been trying to pump them for information about the investigation or the police force or whatever, but we're not given any indication of that. And honestly, dumping these guys somewhere out in the middle of the public, public is like, hey, here are these, tough bender cops, and we have completely stripped them of their power. They're not a danger. You would think that would be a really huge boost to Amon and his goals, but they don't do that. Now, again, I can't really call this a flaw just yet in the story. It's just something that to me doesn't make sense. But anyway, let's move on to the last thing that I wanted to talk about. And this was actually one of the things that I liked best about this episode. Now, earlier I had talked about how the circumstances have forced Korra to turn to that spiritual side of her brain. And here we see when the Equalists show up, Korra is actually having to just genuinely turn to simply using her own ingenuity, her own intellect. Her bending is completely useless to her in that situation. And it's just through some simple, quick thinking, some smart thinking, that she is able to save herself from being electrocuted by the lieutenant. So I sort of like that. I like to think that whenever he passed away, I like to think that in spirit, Korra has picked up a little something, not just from Katara, but from Sokka as well. Oh yeah, I guess I guess I should say a little something about the whole thing with Korra getting in tune with Aang's spirit. This really wasn't like it was when Aang contacted Avatar Roku for the first time. Korra didn't really get the chance to speak to Aang directly. She only got flashes that she had to do some math on in order to understand what Aang was telling her. And honestly, in terms of storytelling, I'm very pleased by this decision. It shows us that while Korra has made some small progress in the spiritual side of her training as the Avatar, she still has a long way to go. And it leaves us wanting more. I know the fans are, including me, are really dying to see her have that conversation with Aang, to see what he has to say to her, and to see if maybe he has a message for Katara. But it simply is, in terms of storytelling, in terms of her character, it's just too soon for Korra. Now, obviously some pretty big stuff is going to happen in the next episode. It's going to be a big slam bang 1 hour deal. I'm super looking forward to it. But I can't really blame the guys for wanting to keep keep some of the really big goodies on the table for later on in the storyline. And that's something that is definitely worth looking forward to. Anyway, folks, this is a really fantastic episode. A really great build up for the big blowout next week. So as always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. You can of course follow me on Twitter as Who's Your Jedi. And until next time, take care and have a good one.